Welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. And today, as you can hear, we are still sponsored by OmniCorp for all your law enforcement needs. So I won't be doing too much talking today so that I can avoid hacking into the microphone too much. And Sam's got some stuff that he wanted to rant about.
Well, we got the two books behind me. One, I keep bringing out the epidemiology in public health because obviously that's kind of the major topic when it comes to at least our conversations. And the other one, I brought up a religious book. You know, people give me stuff to read. They're like, this is going to be the thing that converts you. And I read it because I entertain them. And I mean, it always comes down to the same thing. You're not going to science somebody into religion. There's just no way to do it. And I think it's kind of a pointless endeavor. And I think it's just as pointless to try to science someone into atheism because we don't know what's beyond what we already know. So, and that's what it always comes down to.
It's not a physical argument. It's a metaphysical argument.
And it always ends up in the same endpoint, which is, well, no matter how much we learn. So we learn about the earth revolving around the sun. Well, it's the next thing. Well, what created the galaxy? You know, well, okay, we understand the galaxy a little more. Well, what created the universe? Well, we understand the universe a little bit more. Well, what's beyond that? There has to be an endpoint to that. And what's beyond that? And every time we discover something new, it just pushes the goalpost to that next thing we don't know. And if you want to call everything we don't know God, I'm cool with that. That's fine. But as far as the book's written and stuff, that's where I have the hangups. And so it always comes down to the same argument, no matter what somebody gives me to read. I mean, you even gave me stuff, Devil's Delusion, and at some point, almost like you read these great minds having this argument. And yeah, it takes that great mind to have that argument because I don't understand nothing but the surface level of quantum physics. But at the same time, what if that mind was, cleaning up our oceans or, ending this debate on climate change that ends up being ridiculous or helping with a little bit, this little thing called cancer. Or something along those lines. That same mind that's arguing over something we have no control over anyways, whether it's right or wrong, versus all these things within our surface area that could be getting better. And that's where it actually ticks me off is why are you wasting your time with this?
And then people become obsessed with Peterson declaring whether or not he's a Christian, by golly. And his point is, that's not the point. What I'm trying to get us to talk about here is that these metaphysical things are important. This is not a binary choice that we shout at each other over. We all, even the Dawkinsons of the world need to accept that this is part of humanity. You don't have to accept it as this. You don't have to accept it as Judaism or Islam or Christianity or Buddhism or any of these other things, but you have to accept that this urge for the supernatural explanations for the supernatural are an inherent part of our humanity. We have, I don't remember who said it, but we have a God-shaped hole in our heart. We've brought up Nietzsche before, that God is dead, so what are you going to replace him with? And the Germans found some bad things to replace him with. And that is Stalin, the USSR. Communism is an inherently atheistic theology, basically, and look what that led to in the USSR and in communist China. So we have to acknowledge this and figure out, both as individuals and as a society, what we're going to do about it so that we can live in harmony with each other and even within our own selves.
Yeah, well, we got a comment way back when that there wasn't a lot of intellectual diversity on our show, and it was I'll give it legitimacy for that specific episode that it was on because we were very like-minded on it. It was a CRT episode. But at the same time, if you want to really think about it, we have a diversity of thought on the biggest topic of all lifetime, which is the meaning of life. You believe in the Christian faith, and I don't. So it actually, the most fundamental thing in life, we are in disagreement on. So if you want your diversity of thought, there you go. Start from there and work down. Now, if we happen to agree on a certain topic, like Wheel of Time, and how that goes, or CRT and the dangers involved with that ideology becoming mainstream, then yes, we can nitpick about why we agree on that, and then someone that disagrees can come in, and by all means, we'll get a three-way conversation going, just like we did with your friend on repurposed drugs. I have no problem with that. I think some of those people would realize how hard it is to get in front of a microphone and talk at that point. Especially the regrets later. It's like, oh, I should have said this, or I should have said that, or I should have said this other thing differently. Well, let's do this right now. If we haven't lost you already, if you're a Wheel of Time episode watcher.
Speaking of Wheel of Time.
Yeah, this is not going to be a Wheel of Time episode, but we do want to plug. Heath is currently reading through and taking a lot of notes on the books themselves. So in between seasons of the show, we're going to talk about the actual book during some episodes, and we'll do it as it relates to the show, but also just the deeper meanings of some of the things in the books.
Yeah. It started off with we don't think the series, this TV show worked, and so I wanted to get back into the book and talk about why the book worked, what makes it work as a narrative. And so I will refer back to the show, and there were some points where I took some notes of, I think this would have been a better way to do this episode, do an episode or do this scene and things like that. But for the most part, I'm going to be talking about the way the narrative builds, the way the story builds, and the characters build from the very beginning. And so our first episode, we'll probably talk the first, dozen or so chapters, depending on how long it takes and how far we get. So if you want to start reading along and read up to that point, next time, that's what we're going to be talking about when we do a Wheel of Time episode. It'll be all about the first dozen or so chapters of the Eye of the World.
All right. So if you're just here for Wheel of Time, we will make it pretty obvious in the titles when we're talking about the book. And probably you'll see it in the memes too, because I try to do something related to Wheel of Time on there. All right. Any other house cleaning before we go on?
Not that I can think of.
Which of the topics did you want me to start with?
Well, we've been talking about religion. You want to keep going down that road?
Yes. Okay. So this was a conversation with clients of mine that happened to be Jehovah's Witnesses as well. And I don't know if anybody saw the controversy with I think it's the Hasidic Jews in New York, I'm wanting to say, but wherever it is, it was one of the Jewish populations with the injection. And well, nobody's really following this, because if you're not following somebody specific who has been questioning a lot of things, you don't know that it's been messing up women's menses. And that was a kind of something in the literature when they were applying for emergency use authorization and then for biological license, that was kind of just glossed over, because in rat studies, the lipid casing, I'm going to try to use the layman's terms, casing in the drug that transports it in the body, was having an effect on the ovaries of the rats. And the long-term effect of that, they didn't know. So that was one of the concerns that came out, and the government and everybody said, just don't worry about it. That was rats. It's not humans. Well, first of all, that's not how science works. We see it in rats, and then we say, oh, maybe we need to study this in primates and then humans and see what happens, or at least put it on the list of things to follow up with when we're doing our human trials. But that's not what happened. They just said, don't worry about it. But it is affecting the menstrual cycle of some of the females that we'll call it a rare side effect, because that will stay within YouTube rules. That's a vague term, because what is rare? But a rare side effect is it messes up the menses. Well, I didn't know this about this group of Jewish people. The elders track the women's menses and have them on a schedule, so to speak, because it has one of the goals of that is to optimize procreating so you can have more of your faith. And the second is it's something with hygiene, and I didn't get a further explanation on that.
There's in I want to say Leviticus, there's a prohibition against having sex while your wife is on her menstrual cycle.
Well, either way, they have a schedule, they have a log of the women in their community and their menstrual cycles. Well, it threw all that off because it was messing with their cycles and it was making it unpredictable. Not only did it change it, it changed it in a way that became unpredictable. 3 months on, 2 months off, twice in a month, then not for a while, and all of these weird things. So, and postmenopausal women started having something similar to a menstrual cycle again, and that shouldn't happen.
Nope.
So
you think that
this
would be news.
Rare side effect messed with their faith-based organization of how they do things, and they started protesting against it, and apparently that got squashed pretty quick. But back to the Jehovah's Witness, they try to be apolitical as much as possible, which I kind of hate that word, because so much is meshed with politics that it's kind of a gray area, a soup we all kind of sit in, and it really boils down to what's important to you. Because people who call themselves apolitical, well, if the right topic came up, they would make a comment, or they would talk about it, or they would vote a certain way. And we see that with COVID. So many of these doctors that claim to be apolitical, well, now they're starting to speak out because it affects what they do, which is make people better from illness, right? But all that aside, they what was the Bible verse again?
So what they use, I'm pretty sure. I don't know a lot about their
Yeah, it might be
doctrine,
worded slightly different in theirs, and if you knew the verse, I can look it up. But
the main verse is when it's recorded in a couple of the Gospels. Some of the Jewish leaders are trying to trap Jesus and get him in trouble, and they ask him basically about paying taxes. He asks for a coin. He takes the coin and says, "Whose face is on this?" And then he says the verse that people know is, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's." And so that is used varyingly by denominations to say that Christians should submit to earthly authorities.
Well, they take that verse very literally and say, well, whatever comes from the top down, we accept it because we're supposed to, and we'll be in a better place later. So if it happens here, who cares? And of course, that's very much paraphrasing the whole argument on that side. But so don't correct me with little details.
Trying to be we're trying to keep things simple here without being simplistic, which is a hard line to walk.
We're being nuanced, but yeah, simple is the best word. Simple but nuanced. And so now we've got some contradictions that are going to come out of this. So they also don't take blood transfusions for medical reasons, or anything made from human tissue injected into their bodies. Now, we'll bring up the Pfizer thing later, but per what it's supposed to be, none of these vaccines have that component, right? They're not supposed to. They're all manufactured in a lab without using human tissue, theoretically. So that's not an issue. But when we talk mandates, so now we get into politics. A vaccine is not political, and I hate that it is just bringing up the word becomes a political conversation. But When we talk mandates, that is politics, because that is something
Yes.
done by the government, and we should have some say in that as citizens. Uh, if we allow mandates of this drug injected into your body, we can't stop it from happening again in the future. And what if that involves human injections? What if a treatment option you're forced to take because of mandate that does contradict? So now you got a contradiction. You either have to accept the drug because authority, or you have to oppose the authority because of the drug. And kind of, we had this talk earlier because I had him in earlier, and it really made for an uncomfortable moment, because you have to think about that. You either are apolitical and you have to accept the injection no matter what it means from your faith, or you don't accept the injection that you can't take from your faith but oppose the government. That was one contradiction. The other one is, and this is where it gets a little bit more philosophical, is that was written in the day of Caesar, right? Where your government was either born into place or you were conquered into having that government. And it was a top-down authoritarian pretty much no matter where you were. But realistically, we are the government as it is. And it's representative versus, true democracy, but we still vote on those representatives. So are we the Caesar? And that's the question. That is, I think, the thought experiment. We are technically the Caesar. So being political is not questioning the actual authority, because they don't actually have that authority without us. And that's kind of the other road I wanted to go down. So you kind of pick where you want to comment. And this would be a good one if you're in the audience. Comment. Give me where you think I'm off, or a deeper thought we could have gone down.
Well, that brings me back to the instance that I've mentioned several times before of Peterson in a Q&A in Australia, interrupting this girl and saying, no, don't, it's you, it's me, it's us. We theoretically live in liberal Western democracies here, so stop making us versus the government, the people versus the government. We are the government. So what are you doing about it? And I think it does matter how we phrase these arguments, that bureaucrats are employees when we think about them like that, but the elected officials are also employees. They are not our masters. They are not our supervisors. They are not our bosses. They are employees of us. Why don't we treat them that way more? Why don't we talk about them that way more? That's how this should be phrased, is how in the world do you have the right, the authority, the chutzpah to do this as an employee of us, to force us, your bosses, to do something that we're not willing to do? And that should be the phraseology. That should be the thinking.
Well, that brings me back to when the changeover of guard between the red side and the blue side, this last January, was the thing. We've got this mandate based on this election. Our policies are mandated based on this election. No, they're not. You barely squeaked it out. You're 50-50. Your side won barely, but you still have to be a servant of the other 50%. You're just going to do it with a slightly different bend than they wanted. We're all your boss, not just the people who voted for you. And I think that's something else lost in the mix.
So I left a book down there for you. Kevin Williamson is one of my spirit animals, because he's really snarky, as well as being really insightful. And one of the first chapters in that book is titled Politics is Violence, because it is. And that's something that we don't think of enough because we use euphemistic language too much.
Mhm.
Okay, ultimately, the concept of liberal lowercase l government is that we as citizens are giving the government, we are installing in this government of our choosing the only legitimate use of force and violence in society. Okay, so in order to keep us from being tribal, as our nature is, and as we were for the overwhelming majority of human history, and
Mhm.
going at each other, we're going to install that inherent violence in us in this government so that we can try and make things more equal and fair and just, and keep things from spinning out of control. So anytime we're talking about these kinds of government policies, you always need to have that in mind. You need to have in your mind politics is violence, okay?
Mhm.
And oh no, that's not a scary thing, because think about it, there are certain times where we want to and need to use violence. It is perfectly justifiable to use violence to uh, uh, keep someone from or punish someone who has committed murder or rape or those kinds of heinous crimes. So there is a legitimate use of violence there. Is there a legitimate use of violence to force your neighbor who disagrees with you on, you know, getting the vaccine, on wearing a mask, on funding crappy art? This is something that drives me crazy when we talk about um, government budgets, is it turns into a dollars and cents argument. It's not a dollars and cents argument, it's a moral argument.
Mhm.
You think the government should be funding this or that. Are you willing to use violence against your neighbor if they say, no, I'm not going to pay for that? Because if they don't pay for that, someone's going to show up on their door, and that someone's going to have a warrant and a gun.
Mhm. This is going to sound harsh. Maybe it is. To say you're apolitical when you are in part the head of what is your government, is actually a Pontius Pilate moment where you're trying to wash your hands of whatever happens because you're partly responsible for whatever happens, albeit a small part. I think that's where it gets abstract, is people, because it's such a small part, because you're one of millions of votes, doesn't change the fact that you are a part. It'd be like chopping a finger off and saying, well, it's not the whole hand. It still has a part to play. So yeah, I think it's a mental trying to wash your hands of whatever happens. The feeling of out of control when you have a little control is worse than feeling out of control when you didn't have control to begin with.
It's not wanting to be directly responsible for something, but
Mhm.
you're being indirectly responsible. I think the cliche that not making a choice is a choice is often overused and abused, but it is
Mhm.
correct at its root. It is a choice that you're making.
Well, that's why we speak of Pontius Pilate in a bad way.
Hmm.
We don't say, well, he didn't do it. He didn't kill Jesus. We say, no, he's responsible for Jesus' death because he didn't do anything to stop it.
He was ultimately the authority there. He was
Mhm.
ultimately the one who was in charge. And rather than being in charge and executing his authority one way or another, he said, I don't want any part of this.
Mhm.
We don't let him off the hook, historically or theologically.
And that's where the story matches what kind of the moral of the story is important, even though it's religious text, right? So
Hmm.
we go back to
Hmm.
Peterson. That's something we should learn from. And no matter where you think it came from, it's still a good dang lesson.
Yeah.
But that's really all I had to say about that. We tend to ramble on sometimes. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that forward just because it was an interesting contradiction based on the current situation we're in that we're going to go further into.
Well, it's also an interesting contradiction because it reminded me of something I'd forgotten about and you'd never heard of. Um, now, uh, something, because I wasn't planning on going down this route, and you brought up a good point. Um, I don't know that, and I don't think that human tissue is used in the manufacture of these drugs. But a whistleblower came forward with emails proving that aborted fetal tissue was used in the research of the Pfizer for sure, and I believe the Moderna vaccine as well. And this was buried very quickly, but this is a big effing deal to a lot of not just religious people, but people who have very strong moral feelings about abortion and about using tissue from abortions
Now, I
to
don't know where their stance would
use
be
medical
on this,
research.
and I would have to ask. He is an elder in their church, so he's like he can recite anything that they need me to do. And I ask a lot of questions because just because I'm not religious doesn't mean I'm not curious about what people believe. And in fact, the more I have trouble having a certain opinion of my own without having as much information as I can. That's kind of one of the themes of this whole podcast. And I don't know where they stand on that, but that would be kind of a, I don't think that would play into what we talked about because the research for it versus what's actually injected into your body. I mean, any human study is research on human tissue.
It still creates a moral conundrum, and I brought up when I was talking about the horrible abuse of HIV positive children in New York foster homes. I brought up the doctor's trial, and for even to this day, there are biomedical ethics debates on the use of that research because that research was available. That research was published to varying degrees, and it did show important things. It did show important, potentially life-saving information, but should it is an ongoing debate. Should we use that considering how they get those results?
Well, I brought up the Eastern Bloc and the German studies that were just horrendous that we still actually benefit from to this day. No one would ever get away with doing that now. Well, we think, but you still have to figure out if some of those things you brought up, I didn't know they were going up until early 2000s. But the horrible things that were done in the name of science, we wouldn't know a lot of stuff we know today that keeps people alive to this day without it being done. And that's just the reality of the situation. Now, as far as the fetal tissue, I was talking to some research doctors at one point, and there are lots of ways of harvesting that without aborting children and along those lines. So from an ethical debate, my thing is, where did you harvest it from?
Yeah.
If it was done in a humane way to everybody involved, it's going to help more people than it hurts, right? If you're aborting babies to get it, now we've got a whole different ethical issue.
Yeah. Anyone who's had children knows that one of the gazillions of forms you go through and you sign is they will ask if you want all the icky goo to go to research, because there's stuff there that they can use for research and for production of drugs and whatnot. And so you can check that box if you're fine with that. So there are ways of getting some of this stuff, but all of the articles I read, and I looked at some of the emails, but it was way back when it first broke, and my recollection is it was specifically from aborted fetal tissue, at least from the Pfizer emails. And again, why did this disappear so freaking fast? This is a big effing deal, and it's, as we talked about in our abortion debate / discussion, it's not just a religious issue. There are atheistic or agnostic people who have strong opinions on abortion because it's a human life issue. It's a human life issue you have to think about and you have to make a decision on, in the same way that these vaccine mandates are a human life issue. Do you have bodily autonomy or do you not?
Mm-hmm. And again, we should be the ones deciding that. Notice all of these things are coming from executive order, whether it's a governor, a mayor, or all the way at the top. Every single one of these things is being done by executive order, not by representative government. And realistically, 2 years into the process, we've had time for Congress to convene on this.
And this boggles my mind, is infuriating to me, is how has this not been challenged? Where are our representatives who are supposed to be closest to us, and where are the courts that are supposed to protect against abuse as a last line of defense? There are laws and there is case law, judicial decisions that the government can have broader powers than usual in an emergency. There are emergency use things.
Mm-hmm.
The executive orders and temporary emergency things started to happen in the spring of 2000. It is now January 2022.
Mm-hmm.
How long does something last before it's no longer temporary?
Mm-hmm.
At some point, that needs to go away, and the legislature needs to sack up and pass a law, or else we need to start ignoring this crap, because this is not lowercase l liberal democracy. This is authoritarianism. This is fascism.
Well, even on the state level, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, if it is going on, but Governor Abbott used executive order to counter the federal executive order. And as far as I know, there is no legislative action in Texas to make that executive order Texas law. But in Florida, DeSantis used the executive order to counter the Fed, but with the instruction to his legislator to convene, have a special session, and create Florida law to counter the. So yeah, he had to do that because it was reactionary. It was the counterpunch. But now he's trying to do it the right way to make sure that it survives the long-term court process. That's respectable. Why it wasn't done sooner, I don't know. Why it wasn't done ahead of the problem, because you could have predicted this with the way the administration's going. Why these local governments didn't get ahead of the stuff coming from the top down, I don't know, but who knows? Because it wasn't going to get them a vote then, I guess, and now it will. But
yeah, it's an odd year. It's primary season is starting to kick up here. Abbott's got some primary challenges, so we should see lots of good action from Abbott now.
Yeah, well,
go governor.
Whoever wins that primary, has got a shoe in, because they got Beto O'Rourke running against him, and he's the perpetual loser of.
Yeah, bro.
He's a professional election loser, is what he is. That's his job title, because I can't think of anything he's actually ever won.
The marriage lottery. He married into literally billions of dollars. For anyone who thinks Beto is cool, no, he married into billions of dollars and used his place on the El Paso city council to help his father-in-law get cushy deals, even where it hurt little guys.
Well, that segues right into my health insurance talk, because it does go with policy. So I'm having a little issue with my last checkup / evaluation, which is the Clear You for Action evaluation for my shoulder, or my pec. I guess they say check chest, even though the surgery was at the shoulder. But when you, with a lot of insurance, when you pay for the surgery, they call it the global plan. You pay for the surgery plus a certain amount of follow-ups. So it's not pay for it, then pay for another doctor's appointment, pay for another, which the price is already built in there. It's not like you're paying less. It's all one lump sum. And the doctor, or the office will bill the insurance for those subsequent checkups, but it's not on you. You've already paid your copay, you've already paid your deductibles and everything. And they can't bill for that until you actually come in. And you have to do it all within 90 days of the surgery. So we ended up in a situation where, well, the end of the year was coming and the main doctor had a family emergency. Apparently his mother died, which sucks. His PA, which was good, the reschedule, apparently got COVID. And so that pushed it out till past the end of the year. That also pushed it outside of the 90 days. Well, from a business ethics and a client to professional ethic standpoint, you would still honor that visit, even though you can't make money off of it. That's just the way it is. If I cancel a session with somebody or an eval with somebody, I honor it later for no charge, right? If the waiter spills your food on the way out, they don't charge you for another plate for you to get your food, right? So from an ethics standpoint, you do right by your client, by your patient. The problem is, apparently there's a roadblock in the way to keep them from doing that. It's not a matter of I just lost one appointment's worth of money. It's a matter of they can't have me come in without charging me because of something with Medicare law, where if they do that, that breaks their contract with that, and you get so many strikes, you're not allowed to take Medicare or Medicaid after that. So it is actually a government policy that is preventing them from honoring my session without charging me when I come in. Now we worked out a deal where it's going to be not too much of a charge, but still, it's another example. And people talk, I hate that it goes into the universal healthcare argument because it's not that. It's a system that when we find the bugs, we got to fix them. And this system has a lot of bugs that sticks it to the patient and protects the healthcare system and the insurance companies, because both of them are going to win on this, even if one wanted to do the right thing. And that's what's got me kind of my panties in a bunch over here. Anything?
I think I've mentioned this. I think I've mentioned this before, and I don't remember who I got this from, but think about the businesses, the business industries you hate the most. And I guarantee you they're the most heavily regulated industries in the country. Finance, heavily regulated. People have all kinds of complaints about their banks. Telecommunications, your cable company. People always hate their cable company, heavily regulated. Same thing with utilities. Airlines, flying is a pain in the butt. It is a massively regulated and federally interfered with business. And healthcare, especially healthcare. The big thing about healthcare that I know we have both tried in the past to be terrible insurance salesmen. Did you ever sell health insurance?
Yes.
Okay. So what a lot of people don't know is that almost always your health insurance rates, the payment rates, are all based on Medicare rates. They're all based on some percentage of what Medicare will pay. So the federal government is fixing the prices in the medical industry almost always. Okay, there are certain things, and you can see where this doesn't happen, things tend to work out better. LASIK for a very long time was an elective surgery. I think a lot of insurances now will cover it, but for a long time, it was an out-of-pocket, like a plastic surgery, like a cosmetic surgery. And so you had more innovation and more competition, and the processes and procedures got better and better until where now it's a fairly routine, relatively inexpensive in the grand scheme of surgeries procedure. That's zip, you're done. And
it's a disturbing procedure. 13 years ago, by the way. 13 years ago, got it done. Best two grand I ever spent, because
exactly.
No pun intended, but I've never looked back. But 13 years later, I still reach for my glasses every morning.
Yeah.
When I wake up. But it is a disturbing surgery, especially when they say, look at the green dot, look at the green dot, and then the green dot disappears. And then they say, look at the green dot again. And you're like, oh my God, I'm blind. I'm blind. I'm blind. And then the green dot comes back and you're like, oh, thank goodness. But you can smell your eye burning. That's the most disturbing part.
Ugh.
It's lovely.
Well,
It's a
I
lovely
was
smell.
thinking, I was thinking about looking into it, and now I'm no longer looking into it. Okay.
But it's only
The
15 minutes and they give you a Valium. It's fine.
the point being, the government bureaucracy is inherently inefficient because there are no positive reinforcements that come along with it.
Well, and go back to Schmachtenberger conversation where he was talking to Brett Weinstein, and he was talking about free markets and liberal democracies. And when you have a government of the people, the only way it actually works, and this is going to play a little bit away from what you're talking about, but then I'll kind of sacky it and circle back, is it has to be the order of the people check the government checks the markets, and the markets go to the people. And so it has to be that order for it to actually work. Now, here's where it goes to, that's where it goes against your point, because we need regulation from the government on the markets. But it has to be regulation in a way that the markets benefit the people, not the markets benefit themselves.
Exactly.
And that's where this goes wrong, because again, the only loser here was me. The doctor, the hospital, the facility are all going to still get paid. The insurance company's not going to shell out any extra money. Me, who paid extremely high premiums, paid all my deductibles, paid my out-of-pockets, now has to add an additional cost to cover something that was outside of my control because of that government regulation. And again, you want to be apolitical, but if you're the doctor or the hospital, you're part of the problem because you're in the system that could check the insurance company because of the negotiations and stuff. You probably have, you're the AMA and whatever associations you're part of have political sway, and they could advocate for the people, but they don't. They advocate whatever deal gets them the most money out of the insurance companies.
Exactly. And that is something that's so infuriating about the rising democratic socialist movement and the right's retort to it, for the most part, is you know, you hear the AOCs of the world and the Pocahontases of the world talking about how we've tried the free market. No, we haven't. We don't have free markets, especially when you're talking about something like healthcare. We have a cartel. We have a cartel system, and it's a cartel of big major health care and insurance companies and the government. They have formed a cartel with each other.
Well, let me take it a step further, because this is a concept I think a lot of people need to get through their head. They consider insurance free market. Insurance is socialism. Everybody pools their money for the benefit of the people who get sick and hurt. It is the definition of socialism. In fact, it was invented in China, where all these people that would travel across the river in their boats carrying their harvest or whatever they were taking across to sell in the markets would split their stuff up between 10 boats. Because if one boat sank, everybody lost 10% versus one person losing 100%. So it's the product of communal thinking, where everybody puts in a little bit of risk instead of one person possibly risking it all. That's what insurance is. We all pay our premiums, and those that get sick and hurt get a benefit from that pool. And then the company that puts it together theoretically makes a profit, should be within reason, based on what we pay in. So insurance is socialism. So yes, AOC, we have tried socialism, and it's not working too well when you don't check it for the people.
Well, yeah, it's your point about that's what I was reinforcing your point about the regulation helping the people, not the market, because
Mhm.
this is a cartel. This is the people who help write these bills are the people that are really big and have the influence. Okay. Some local rural doctor isn't weighing in on these healthcare and health insurance regulations. No, it's Anthem, Blue Cross, and I don't know,
Mhm.
whatever else, the major healthcare providers. Those are the people weighing in on these regulations,
Well, and here's where
and they're
people confuse it with the free market, is because they're publicly traded entities. And guess where all of these people's stock portfolios are in? It's just like the hubbub around Pelosi's investments in companies like Pfizer and Moderna, and was it
them.
72 others in Congress that
Mhm.
have major investments in these areas. I bet you they also have investments in Blue Cross Blue Shield, in
No.
Aetna, in Cigna. I mean, these are publicly traded companies, and our politicians are making money off of them and creating laws to where they make more money. Again, the people need
And,
to be checking the authorities. The authorities need to be checking the market in a way that benefits the people. Again, that's the only way
and
it's going to be sustainable.
and they've got us arguing with each other and
Mhm.
arguing with the middlemen when we should be looking at the politicians and the big CEOs and owners of these companies who are colluding with each other to benefit themselves and the rest of us be damned.
Mhm. And the first step is awareness. You know, I wanted to bring that forward because this one little thing probably rarely happens, because most times it's the client that cancels their appointments. And if I canceled and it pushed me out of the 90 days, that's on me.
Yeah.
But we ended up in a situation where they had no system that they could do for reconciling the situation.
Well, just think about the situation though. It's a perfect illustration of the insidious nature of the political argument, because when when people are pushing for healthcare reform, one of their favorite targets is to vilify doctors. Vilify healthcare providers and insurance companies as greedy people who don't actually care about your health. Hold on a second here. You've created a regulation whereby a doctor cannot, by law, see a patient for free,
Mhm.
and the doctor's the bad guy? How does that work?
They are part of the problem though, because
Mm.
they still spend 5 minutes with you, tops, come in, say, and give
Oh
you
yeah,
as
yeah.
little of their time as possible, double book. So you sit in that office or triple
Mhm.
book. So you sit in that office for 20 minutes past your appointment time, and so they do participate in the process by doing these other things.
Yeah.
But and at the same time, their organizations, if they band it together and say, we're not going to do this, that's power. That's the whole purpose of unions, right? Is the workers should be represented by this organization, uh, if it's done right. But at the same time, there are organizations that's not a union in the medical system, but they're not advocating for the patient at the moment.
Mhm.
Uh, in fact, if you read the equity narrative 50-page document that they
Oh,
have to
jeez.
all adhere to now, I don't even know what they're advocating for anymore. But it's little things like that are the frustrating things for the real people involved, that never go up the chain to where they need to
Mhm.
go. And I mean, the first step was hopefully 9 or 10 people get aware of it because of our talk here. And I got some people I'm going to talk to, and I'm going to talk in more depth with the doctor when I go in tomorrow. But it's it's annoying. It's annoying because it's still going to be 50, $70 out of my pocket. I mean, COVID affects us all. I've seen less clients over the last 3 weeks than
Yep.
I think this is the least I've actually worked session based in the 10 years or 13 years that I've been training. And it's all because I had an exposure, I'm going to stay out, or I'm actually sick, or I'm covering shifts for somebody that has to stay out because of it. So it's all been that stuff, which I guess segues us into the numbers talk.
Yeah, we want to talk numbers a little bit.
Yeah. Let's take a quick bathroom break.
Okay.
All right, sum up that last little bit. Just because we don't agree with dismantling it all and putting in a new system like universal health care or whatever, doesn't mean we don't think there's reforms that need to happen within the current system.
And keep in mind, the problem with reforms is it lets politicians pass a law, and say, look, I've solved the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Have you? You're the ones who caused the problem in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I think when we talk about reforms, people need to remember complexity is a subsidy. The bigger and more complex a law is, the bigger and more complex a bureaucracy is, the bigger an organization has to be in order to navigate that bureaucracy. So the people who are going to be best suited to take advantage of a big Byzantine healthcare or health insurance regulatory code are the really big businesses. It's going to be nigh impossible for an upstart to get going and say, I've got a better way. I think I have a better way that's simpler, easier to use, and is going to be more customer oriented. You can't do that. There's no such thing as a startup, really. The startups you see now are people who are just jettisoning the whole idea and saying, you know what? I don't take insurance at all. I'm a cash business. Okay. I'm going to give you the lowest rate I can, but you're going to pay me cash at the visit.
But that's where regulation comes in. The more regulated the industry, the more you're allowed to, or the less you're allowed to do that. You can't do that as a doctor these days. You do it as a chiropractor.
You can if you don't take Medicare and Medicaid.
Okay.
Now keep in mind, the overwhelming majority of medical expenses are shockingly by old people. So if you cut out Medicare and Medicaid, you're cutting out the overwhelming majority of your market. And yet the regulatory burden is so great that there is a growing number of doctors who are willing to do that, who are willing to say, you know what, I'm going to cut out the I don't want to put a number on it because I can't remember off the top of my head, the overwhelming majority of my market base because it's just not worth it.
I guess the best industry to do that in would be the pediatric industry. but yeah, it's a shame it's this way. It really is, because it really does screw the patient. And it opens the door for the arguments of the AOCs, because on the surface level, you don't see that nuance. I didn't know about this rule till I was trying to get that appointment. And I was like, hey, you canceled on me. This is customer service issue. This is an ethical issue. You need to make this up. And finally, 20 minutes into this conversation, they're like, we can't. Like, we should have led with that, first of all. We wouldn't have had a 20-minute angry conversation, which is 20 minutes of your time, which I would already been in and out of your office with that. So unless you come across a situation, it doesn't become apparent. And most people would have just gone along with it. If they had great insurance, they would have paid their copay and moved on. Or if they didn't and they couldn't afford it, they would have just not gone in for that. And this is an important appointment, because this is the one where they test the strength of what they fix. They test the range of motion to make sure everything else is okay. And then it clears you for activity after that with guidance on how to return to it. So it's a huge appointment, because without it, I could pop my boob again, and then I'm left with no boob for the rest of my life. And that's a pretty big deal, especially when you work in my industry. But now we get onto the COVID numbers. I think it might be good just to kind of start with an overview of where we're at as a nation. because everybody knows we're in the middle of the OmniBug.
And it's got things spiking, and it's got media getting hysterical and people getting hysterical.
Well, these are the current numbers. This is based on New York Times data. And whoops, wrong one. Here's the confirmation of it with the WHO data. So it's going in the same thing. And we've got this massive spike, which is quite significant. Now, again, that biggest top spike is a little bit skewed. The one where we got headlines over 1 million today, that was 1 million over the weekend, realistically, because a lot of places weren't reporting with the New Year's and holidays. And a lot of places haven't been reporting on weekend numbers to begin with. So a lot of these spikes with the values in between, those are Mondays.
Because you get a clump of data. Yeah, you get a clump of data come in.
Yeah. So it's slightly deceiving. Maybe I should just I won't blow it up. But that's the case. Yes, we are, the trend line is right there where my cursor is. So it is still higher than our biggest spike ever when it comes to cases. And it's a lot. It's the OmniBug now. This is more contagious than any other form of this virus than we've ever seen. It's more contagious than the cold. It's more contagious than the flu. It is, I think they lowered the household time from, I can't remember what it exactly was before, but it's down to 4 hours. So if you live in a household with somebody who has the disease, not talking to their face, but just in the same household for 4 hours, you pretty much have a guarantee of getting this virus, where transmissibility of the original was unvaccinated 35% in the household, living in the household, period, for the whole duration of the person having the disease. So it's very significant how much more contagious this one is. Now, why is it contagious to people who are vaccinated and have had the disease? That's the big question, because we're having it's basically mostly breakthrough infections because there's more vaccinated people than there are unvaccinated people, and include in the vaccinated people who have had the disease. So that's even a bigger pool to choose from, but yet we're still having numbers of close to 1 million a day for the last several days, right? So why is this one more contagious? Well, part of it is, I guess we have to take the background of how the immune system works. And I think everybody throws a lot in antibodies, which are important in this conversation. But then we have B cell memory, and the B cells create the antibodies. Then we have CD4, the helper T cells, which in essence, again, this is all simplified, create the B cells with their code to create the antibodies. And then we have the CD8 cells, which are the killer cells, T killer cells. And what they do is they kill cells that are infected with the virus. So those are your kind of 4 pillars of defense. With Omicron, I want to call it Omicron now. Omicron, with Omicron, a lot of the mutations are in the spike protein itself. And so when we're talking antibodies, especially from vaccination, because it was specific to the spike protein, but the greatest antibody adaptation from natural immunity is also in the spike protein, because it's the first thing your immune system sees. That is specific to the receptors on that protein. So if the shape of the protein and the shape of the antibody match, it blocks it. So it blocks all those spikes, and it creates and it keeps it from docking onto a cell and getting it. Okay. So, and again, the mechanism for getting in, we won't even go into. If you want a good follow on a lot of this, good little 20 daily, he does 20 to 30 minute talks, and he's in the UK, so he's about 2 weeks ahead of us on the waves, because they tend to get it about 2 weeks ahead of us, unless the variant happens here. But it's Dr. John Campbell on YouTube, and is apolitical. All he does is go over the numbers, and then the biology behind what's happening. and then he'll read the studies on what they found as far as that supports his theories. So there's no politics involved. All he does is say, okay, so we're talking about Omicron. He goes over the latest publications from South Africa, what's happening in the UK, and then he'll make predictions on the US based on that. So if you want a more detailed one, he's got a whole 20-minute episode on this. But the antibodies, basically they attach, they block it from ever docking. So that's the you don't get sick, because virus comes in, gets cock blocked, can't do anything. After that, the B cells create those, the helper cells create the B cells, and they're doing this based on what they've experienced, right? Now the T killer cells come in and do any infected cells, but if the antibodies are right, you don't get any infected cells or very few infected cells for the T cells to kill. So you never ever get actually sick. Now what's happening with Omicron is that spike protein is different. Now what's unclear is if it's different enough that the antibodies aren't even attaching at all, or if it's just different enough that they're just not attaching very well. So it's not efficient, less efficient. So in the immune system itself, it's kind of bypassing that first preventative measure until your body responds and creates different B cells. So there's a time lag there. Now, why you're still getting less sick if you're vaccinated or had natural immunity is you got those killer T cells. Those are already there, they're already coded for, and they're coded for more recognition than the antibody, because they don't have to attach to that spike protein. They just got to attach to your own cell, which they already know, and kill it. And so your cells are getting infected, so you're getting a little sick. But what happens in that affected cell is that virus breeds by the millions and billions, and then the cell explodes and you get an explosion of more virus in your system, and then it exponentially goes from there until your system can catch up.
Do you have the numbers? Do you have the numbers for hospitalizations and
yeah,
deaths?
I'm gonna bring that up. Yeah. So I'm gonna pull those into it. I just wanted to give a background here. All right. So it's bypassing the antibodies at least to some degree, but the T cells are still there to kill the cells that get infected. So that's why we're still getting breakthrough infections, but they're not as bad. Now, Omicron seems to be less bad in general, and that also might have to do with the spike protein. It might not have the same tissue effect that the original spike protein did, which is where we're getting a lot of long haul COVID from. Now, this is where it gets a little theoretical because they're working on this part.
Right.
But that's just one very possible. It's probably the best hypothesis for it, that the changes in the spike protein made it less toxic to the body. Excuse me. Now, the other, the part two of why Omicron might be more contagious is it's spending more time in the airway here and not getting down to the lungs and infecting the lungs as bad. So that's good for us because it's not killing us, right? Because this is where it gets bad, the pneumonia and everything that comes from that, as well as the blood clots in the system, which might be associated with the spike protein. So those two things aren't happening as much. Great. But the more time it spends breathing in here, well, now it's easier for me to breathe out and expel new virus.
Right.
So I'm creating a bigger aerosol effect. So that's possible number two, why it's more infectious or more contagious. And we're seeing it by the numbers. I mean, there's no denying that this is contagious. Sorry, I had to take a drink there. My throat's getting a little scratchy. Realistically, who knows? As far as the numbers, by the numbers, you've come across it. Let's see, if you take, say, the average case is 3 to 5 days of infectious time. So we'll average that out to 4 and close to 1 million a day. And it's estimated that 4 times as many aren't tested, but are positive. So 4 times 4 million is 16 million people out of 350. And those people see more than one person a day.
Yeah.
So we've all come across it. We're going to be exposed to this unless you just stay in your house. And realistically, we're probably, and again, if you just stay in your house, we're probably all going to get it. It's just how bad. So stay healthy, take your vitamins, and I mean, if you're in a vulnerable adult, get vaccinated. That's my advice. Or no, that's not my advice. That's medical advice. I'm not getting medical advice, but that's my opinion. Okay, so you wanted CDC numbers?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is hospitalizations here.
So we've got a massive spike in cases that you just showed that was way higher in January 22 than the beginning of January 21, and yet our hospitalizations for the time being are noticeably lower, which is obviously a very good thing.
Well, we're spiking over this hill right now.
Yeah.
So the trend line is getting up over that. And there is going to be a lag of hospitalizations from cases. But then again, the numbers out of the UK, remember, this is hospitalizations with COVID, not hospitalizations from COVID.
Right.
So if you've got something spreading so fast and everybody getting tested every time they go into the hospital, it's just common sense at that point.
Or if you're already in the hospital for something unrelated, then you're surrounded by lots of people and most of them are sick. So,
well, and just more people are positive, period.
Yeah.
More people, so more people will test positive for anytime they go into the hospital for whatever reason. So again, it's playing with words. Hospitalized with COVID versus from COVID. And they're actually tracking this in the UK. Thank you. Take note, CDC. They're actually differentiating between that. And so what they're seeing, what they saw with Delta, it was somewhere around 60 to 70% of hospitalizations with COVID were from COVID. With Omicron, it's around 40. So this number, if it's the same as the UK, will be about here. If you were to say from COVID versus with COVID. But yeah, that's the hospitalizations. Also, there's going to be a lag, but let's look at deaths. And this is from the CDC's website. I'm not making this up. YouTube, if you call authority on me, I am giving the numbers of the authority. Deaths, we still seem to be pretty flatline there. Now, again, deaths are going to be even a little bit behind hospitalizations. But again, South Africa, we have to go by, and the UK, they both are showing a pattern that leveled off and actually went down, even though cases were still higher than before. So that's good news. So if we get taken over by Omicron, we probably have very good news. We're all going to be naturally vaccinated. If you are already vaccinated or already had the disease, you're probably going to get a booster here, naturally. And what they're showing from South Africa is they've done already samples from people there and done in vitro studies. There's good crossover immunity from Omicron to Delta and previous forms, which gives us an indication that it's probably going to have good crossover immunity going ahead too. That's great news. In fact, Omicron seems to be so good with crossover that, and again, this is where we get a little theoretical, but it's pushing cold out of the UK. So your typical coronavirus colds, the 4 coronaviruses that cause cold, seem to also be slightly adapted towards from having Omicron.
This reminds me, I listen to Micro's podcast when I can, because he's really amusing. He's got a great radio voice. And he brought up on his last podcast that at the beginning of this, he caught a lot of grief for someone asked him his opinion on this, and he, back in the early 2020, had said, well, my thinking is that we're all eventually going to get it, and you just need to accept that, that we're all eventually going to get it. And that's the way this is shaping up, is that we're all eventually going to get it, in the same way that we all eventually get a cold. The other thing he pointed out that I'd forgotten about that I thought was interesting is that he looked at the reaction, especially early on, to the coronavirus, and made an analogy to the stages of grief, that you saw a lot of people reacting to, and still reacting to, the coronavirus as if they're in one of the 5 stages of grief. And it's I think we're starting to finally see more acceptance here with Omicron, but we are still seeing a lot of brain farting on the 5 stages of grief, but we are still seeing a lot of denial. That one for sure.
Let's go through them.
Yeah.
5 stages of. Let's see if we can get a nice picture. That'll work. Okay, so I think this goes from top down, right? Yeah. So you're saying we're still in denial, even though
A
we're
lot of
also in
people sure are.
acceptance.
No, I think more people are finally reaching acceptance, because the numbers are such that we are all eventually probably going to get this coronavirus, as Omicron is really spreading very rapidly, and so and because it doesn't look like it's as bad, people are saying, okay, well, I guess this is what it is, and we can get life back to normal. But you can certainly think back and see a lot of shock from the very beginning. And a lot of people are still in the denial phase, and what I mean by that is how we went from, slow the spread and flatten the curve, to people having a zero COVID policy, and not just individually, but nationally.
That we can make this thing go away.
Yeah. So I think I mentioned, did I mention on one of our previous recordings that I just saw a story about China locking down a neighborhood that consisted of a couple 100,000 people because one person tested positive for coronavirus. So to me, that's in the denial phase. You're trying to avoid the inevitable. You're saying, no, it's not. No, it's not. We can make this go away. We can make this not happen. In the same way that if you've got a terminally ill loved one, we're going to find some miracle is going to happen. Some miracle cure is going to be found. And you're still seeing that a lot with the way people are treating COVID, with a zero transmission mentality that is just, it was never realistic. And not only is it no longer realistic, it's becoming more and more absurd.
Yeah, I had China up on my ticker, and I need to bring them back because I wanted to show their numbers.
Yeah, keeping in mind this is their numbers, this is their reporting.
Well, that's part of it, because here we go. China mainland. Let's go to there. Okay, so let me share that. Okay, so we got our same stores here. Look at China. This was obviously back when everything started, and then almost nothing. Mostly single and double digits going since then. So the theory is they eradicated COVID, basically. in China. Keep in mind, there are billions of people compared to our hundreds of millions, right?
Yep.
But almost no cases. So this country that has people coming in and out, and that has plenty of international business and travel, has no COVID. That's already suspicious thing number one. Vaccinations. Okay. Look at their vaccination line.
Whoa.
That's kind
interesting.
of funky. Deaths, right in the beginning, they apparently had a lot. And then almost none. Single digits all the way. Again, billions of people. Tests conducted. Look at that line. That look realistic to you?
Not exactly.
So take with a grain of salt the numbers we're getting out of China, because it is the definition of an authoritarian state, and they give out what information they want to give out. There is no us's in China on the any platform giving you the real numbers, and our authorities get what they want us to have. So they're doing their method. Let's do ours. I bet you the numbers aren't as good as they're saying they are.
Yeah.
But yeah, you were right. We're getting a lot of acceptance. Well, it's more fatigue, I think is the word. It's more, now the bargain was with the rollout. Here, well, we'll do this, and we can go back to normal. Now that didn't happen. Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy. I like that. We are kind of in that. Now, a lot of us were in the testing from the beginning. What can we do to mitigate this, and how do we get about our regular life? Not, I'll do this for you if we can get back to our regular life. It's what things will help us get back to regular life.
Yeah. But what makes the most sense? What's the best trade-off?
Oh, that brings me to something else that we may or may not be able to talk about. But here's a publication that's pretty recent. And again, this is peer-reviewed Harvard study. It's in Nature, is the publication. Let's see, I think it was in Nature. No, Journal of Epidemiology. So specific to running these kind of numbers. Yeah. If you did it for yourself.
Let us present this without comment.
Yeah.
What happens.
It's not in the it should you or should you not. It's get off your high horse about you doing best for the community. That's my point. It is not about, is it the best thing for you to do as an individual? Is this whole argument that it's for the better of everybody? Every data point along the way shows it's not. And that's my main point. Get off your high horse. You did it for yourself. Good job. You're probably going to get less sick, because we're all going to get sick. You're probably going to get less sick. Amen, brother. Now, on the flip side, when we look at children, that's the hill I'll die on, because there's this important thing about children's immune system. It adapts really well to things you're exposed to. And you look at the numbers, the trend line, they're not getting sick from this. Their adaptation is going to be better than anything we can do. And the reason, let me just put it as bluntly as I can. The reason we don't get serious colds as adults is because we got colds when we were kids. That cold as a kid, if you were never exposed to it, your whole life would be like coronavirus today, because it would be novel to you. And your immune system as an adult would go for a moment before it can adapt to it. And then it doesn't adapt as well. That's why it's so important for community with kids. Our kids should be in school. They should be in daycare, because they're going to pass around these little illnesses, get a little bit sick, and be good for the rest of their life. That's how the immune system works. That's how it's meant to work. That's my rant. I'm going to keep it that basic.
That's a good place to end on. I think we've covered a lot of ground here. And it's a good place to wrap it up.
Sounds good to me.
All right, we'll see y'all next time.
And I think we'll do the Wheel of Time one next time, huh?
Yeah, hopefully I'll be feeling good enough to do a lot of talking then.
Yeah, and just send me some major points just so, because I hadn't read them that long ago, but reading the whole series through is still a year-long adventure. So,
Oh yeah, yep.
all right. Well, we'll see everybody next time. Like, subscribe, comment, and share. We are reaching in the triple digits now on people. Ooh, so we have exploded as far as percentages go.
Giggity.
But as far as overall numbers, we can make that better. All right. Talk to you later.